right, I think we will at least start with the welcomes and all that. So I am Cheryl Lombard. I'm president and CEO of Valley Partnership. I'm happy to be your moderator today for the CivEx, the Road to Proposition 400 extension. I want to thank everyone at CivEx, especially Don Wallace, for allowing all of us to do this. This is something people on this panel have been working on for a very long time, and it's very important to our region. I do want to say how things are going to go here today. We are going to leave time for questions after all our presentation and discussion. However, at any time, you can use the Q&A section at the bottom of the panel on your Zoom panel. Don't use the chat, but you can put in your Q&A questions at any time, and we will cover those at the end. I also do want to alert everyone this is being recorded. We're going to make it available for others. It should be a great tool in terms of talking about what 400E is. So in terms of our program today, we are going to first start with Audra Thomas, who's the program manager for transportation planning for Maricopa Association of Governments, and she's also a 2011 Flinn-Brown fellow. She's going to start on a presentation with the 400E plan. Then we're going to add and have a discussion with Mayor Kevin Hartke. He's Mayor of Chandler. He's also a 2014 Flinn-Brown fellow. And then Tim Burset, who is the Vice President of Government and Community Affairs at Greater Phoenix Economic Council. As many of you saw, we were hopeful to have Senator Tyler Pace or Representative Frank Carroll. Unfortunately, one has been called away, and then Representative Carroll is on the House floor right now doing votes. So we miss them, and we are going to fill in for them talking about the legislation. But I do want to publicly thank them for being the bill sponsors. I know our city partners work with them from day one. They have done yeoman's work, and you'll hear more about that. But just a great thank you for them for all the work they've been doing on that. So with this, I want to welcome Audra, and we will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And on behalf of Mayor Hartke and the 31 other members of our regional council, the mayors, tribal presidents, and county supervisors that comprise the Maricopa Association of Governments, we're so pleased for the invitation to talk about the extension of Proposition 400, the dedicated transportation tax first established in Maricopa County back in 1985 that delivers the multimodal transportation investments you use, whether or not you are in Maricopa County, and help to enable statewide transportation priorities as well. I'm going to start with just an overview of the plan process, what's included in the plan as well. We'll talk about the investment plan and some of the key elements, although we won't dwell on those features. And then talk most critically about the phase of this process that we're in today, which is enabling legislation to allow Maricopa County voters an opportunity to extend this important tax. For those who may not be familiar, Maricopa Association of Governments is the metropolitan planning organization of really central Arizona, over 50 years old, established through federal law as the responsible party for doing transportation planning and assigning programming or funding associated with the funding coming out of Washington, D.C. We have a planning area that's over 10,000 square miles. That's roughly the size of the state of Massachusetts for comparison. It is a very diverse suite of dense communities, suburban, and then of course, rural and even federal lands. We have 3 native nations within our region as well. After the 2010 census, our urbanized area grew into what we call the Southeast Valley, and therefore, so did our planning area. And the governor expanded our region to include Northern Pinal County, including the municipalities of Maricopa, Florence, and Apache Junction, as well as the entirety of the Gila River Indian community. As I mentioned, this work really culminates an extension of a dedicated half-cent sales tax first established by voters back in 1985. Then a generation ago, our mayors got together and couldn't wait any longer on either state or federal resources to establish high-capacity transportation infrastructure. For those of you who've been in the Valley for some time, you've seen these transportations unfold in front of your eyes. Some of our basic and initial infrastructure was the I-17 and even Interstate 10, but even Interstate 10 that goes coast to coast, ocean to ocean, its last segment was established here in the Valley, right through the Deck Park Tunnel, and that didn't conclude until the 1990s. So much of this infrastructure new, and the reason for it is this dedicated half-cent sales tax, overwhelmingly passed by voters in 1985. You'll see the important corridors established as part of that tax here on this slide, those navy colored corridors. After 20 years of that investment, our mayors got back together and knew our work hadn't been complete. We were continuing to grow at a very rapid pace. And in 2004, sent to the voters another package, a 20-year extension of that dedicated half-cent sales tax. This time it was multimodal. There are a variety of reasons for that. Not only were our transportation needs changing, but it was always envisioned that the first half-cent would be followed by a second half-cent for transit. And unfortunately, that Valtrans plan failed at the ballot box and is one of many reasons why Proposition 400, the first extension of the dedicated half-cent sales tax, was extended for another 20 years and included more than just expansion of our freeway investments. Helped to establish the light rail corridor, helped to open the streetcar in Tempe, which just occurred this past Friday. What you won't see on this slide are important arterial investments. Those are those big roads at the mile grid. That contiguous network is unique in our region. It carries about half of our commuting traffic on any given day. Nor do you see the important investments for regional transit and bus transit support specifically within this region. The outcomes of this work are tremendous. I'll defer to Tim to talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation. We estimate the freeway network alone saves the average motorist about 105 hours each year. The vast majority of our jobs are located within a mile or two of a freeway corridor, a highway corridor, or a high capacity transit corridor. And the investment in transportation helps to unlock potential. You'll see here the corresponding increase in valuation of property immediately adjacent to these transportation investments. It unlocks potential, helps to bring prosperity to all of us. I want to talk a little bit about the plan development process and what anchored it. These are the 6 goals established by our regional our regional council. These 6 goals, nothing necessarily unique here. This is anchored in early public engagement and research that we did 3 and 4 years ago that we carried continuously through the plan development process. The one goal I'd like to point out is in the upper right-hand corner in that tangerine color. Responsiveness is something that was top of mind for our mayors. A challenge they gave us was ensuring that we built a plan that would commit to corridors that take sometimes decades in the making to realize, from vision through design and environmental work, and ultimately construction and being open to the public. How do we balance those needs of long-term commitment with the realization that we are in a rapidly evolving, innovative time and that we want to be flexible and nimble into the future? I'll talk a little bit later about how we were able to achieve that. This is a high-level overview of our process. I won't spend a lot of time on it. We are regulated by both federal and state statute on the development of our plan. It has to be performance-based. Lucky for us at MAG, we have a wealth of data that we use. And that was particularly important because we had some really difficult trade-offs to make. Our mayors had a lot of demonstrated transportation needs, and we couldn't deliver and or implement them all. And so our mayors had to make some tough choices. And that started really at the beginning of this process. Our mayors asked for a call for projects. Our member agencies delivered. You'll see here a map of all the transportation projects and needs they saw from their perspective. This represents almost 1,400 different projects and ideas. The number I actually would like to point out is on the bottom left-hand corner, which is our estimated total of the entire composition of demonstrated transportation need in this region, exceeding $90 billion. That was our starting point. We don't have that much in revenue. We needed to make difficult decisions. Our mayors leaned on the technical analysis and data available, ultimately to make those tough trade-offs. Our policy process ultimately concluded last spring and into last summer, where we presented 4 different scenarios to our mayors, 2 different concepts at 2 different levels of funding, a continuation of the dedicated half-cent sales tax plus the federal funding made available to this region, but also what else we could deliver if we expanded and extended the tax to 1 cent, the same authority that's already made available to all the other counties in the state of Arizona. After a considerable amount of deliberation, discussion, trade-off analysis, compromise, our elected officials came together, and the Transportation Policy Committee, our public-private partnership at MAG, unanimously recommended a project and program portfolio of a continuation of the dedicated half-cent sales tax for another 25 years for a total composition of a portfolio of just over $36 billion. That unanimous recommendation from the Transportation Policy Committee was immediately ratified, again by a unanimous vote of our regional council the following day. We'll talk a little bit more about the investment plan itself. These are those discrete capital projects that have been identified. Many of them will take decades in the making to deliver. I'll just point out a few of them. Complete reconstruction of the Interstate 17. That's again one of the original pieces of infrastructure in this region. Dedicated a couple $2 billion to its reconstruction. It includes an additional HOV lane to help advance multimodal activity throughout the region. This helps to address also a lot of safety issues throughout the corridor, a top priority of our region. Completion of the SR 24 in the Southeast Valley and extending into the Santan Valley into Pinell County. Establishment of the SR 30 or the I-10 reliever in the Southwest Valley. This is one of those projects, at least the middle section, which was originally envisioned as part of our last initiative, Proposition 400. But because of the Great Recession, the projected revenues out of Proposition 400 are anticipated to be about 40% less than we imagined. Those are real projects, real programs that we weren't able to implement over that 20 years. It made our mayor's jobs even harder to look at those deferred projects, in addition to all the new needs within our region. You'll see specific investment on the US 60, both in the Northwest Valley heading up the Grand Avenue corridor, as well on the Superstition, ways to modernize and best leverage that right-of-way and come up with some innovative solutions. Completion of the HOV network throughout the region. And we've been able to deliver as part of this portfolio important transit investments. 2 extensions of light rail heading west out of in our west part of our Phoenix region. 2 extensions of that newly opened streetcar heading out of Tempe and into Mesa. And then another thing we're really excited about is bringing a new mode to the region. Bus rapid transit provides a lot of the same value as light rail, a dedicated high value transit option, but at a slightly lower cost than light rail that we were able to really connect communities. You'll see a 35th Avenue corridor here in Phoenix, Scottsdale Rural Road, connecting the communities of Scottsdale, Tempe, and into Chandler. And then in the East Valley on Arizona Avenue, connecting the communities of Chandler and Mesa as well. The additional yellow lines talk to that expansion, modernization, and even reimagining of the arterial grid network throughout the region. Here's some of the plan elements by the numbers, if you will. One of the things I want you to take away is while we focus a lot on the map and we point to the projects on it, one of the things that's most important, particularly to the constituents for whom participated in this process, were some of the quality of life investments. And you'll see those identified in the programs listed on the bottom left-hand corner of this screen. These are some of the things that we heard from the public were most important to them. They don't necessarily get identified on a plan or on a map, but it really delivers the high quality of life, advances the safety work within this region, and high priorities for constituents. This is also the way that we're going to be nimble and flexible into the future. On the previous slide, I identified those important corridor investments that do take and sometimes generations to deliver. What we'll be able to do through these programs is do iterative calls for projects, find the best and brightest projects every few years, respond to growth, development, and new activity and opportunities along the way. And this is one of the ways that our regional council, our mayors, will be able to be adaptive into the future, particularly given the fact that this is a plan that takes us out to the year 2050, and we know that we will have change. These are an outline of those important programs that we have identified. Our mayors identifying active transportation and a commitment of $1 billion to those bicycle and pedestrian investments. things that will keep our most vulnerable users of the system safe throughout the region. Continuation of air quality investments. We are in a non-attainment area for air quality. Continuation investment and mitigation strategies that are required by the Clean Air Act continue to allow us to access that federal funding and keep us on target for our air quality goals. Expansion of our arterial investments, continuation of support and expansion thereof our bus transit network. We're continuing to see particularly demonstrated needs and desires of transit, even in our far suburban communities in our region. While this is a locally funded, regionally branded transit investment here in this region, we are able to double the amount that the region contributes to bus transit. Emerging technology is one of those new programs we have established, setting aside over $300 million for the technologies of tomorrow that we don't know of today. I want to acknowledge how impressed we are that our mayors had the courage to set aside funding for investments, even if we're not sure what those technologies and advancements will be in the future. It will allow those that lead this organization in the future to ensure this region is smart, to take advantage of those opportunities, and ultimately to have government be nimble, something perhaps we're not always known for. Continuation of our smart technology and signal programs and safety programs here at MAG, and then investment in transportation demand management. How can we get more operational value out of the investments we've already made? We were able to finish this plan, have it be confirmed for air quality through our federal partners, and we're now in the process that requires action by the state legislature. We call this enabling legislation. This allows us to implement the plan and allow voters to seek the opportunity to support a continuation of the sales tax for another 25 years. We have been graced with powerful leadership at the legislature, as Cheryl mentioned at the beginning, with Senator Pace and Representative Carroll, who introduced concurrent bills at the beginning of this session to enable a vote to be taken to Maricopa County voters this November of 2022. Senate Bill 1356 is the bill that has gotten out of both the Senate and House Transportation Committees and has successfully gotten out of the Senate floor with a vote of 21-9. Our bill has an emergency clause that requires a 2/3 vote, a little higher bar for us. And the reason that is needed is to actuate a vote to allow Maricopa County to immediately enact and place this on a ballot for this upcoming November 2022. That's a higher bar for us to be able to get the 2/3 votes of support, but we're continuing to be confident that we'll have that success in the future. We are waiting for action on the House. And so that will conclude my presentation, Cheryl. I do want to acknowledge our Transportation Policy Committee. By state statute, this is the body responsible for development of our plan and its implementation. It is our public-private partnership here at the Maricopa Association of Governments, defined by state statute. It brings a partnership, not just of our mayors, but of the business community, and 6 members appointed by the state legislature to work in partnership to develop this plan. You'll see here during its planned adoption process and its development of the plan itself, we were led by Mayor Gallego of the city of Phoenix. It's her leadership that was able to deliver this unanimous vote. We don't take that lightly. I am thrilled that we were able to work together, but it is her leadership that is responsible for that unanimous vote, something we don't take lightly, as I mentioned. So with that, Cheryl, I'll stop here and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Audra. Yeah, it is. I forgot to mention that I am one of those business members of the TPC. It's been quite a process. And one question to you, Audra, can you just say why Maricopa County actually has to go through the legislature for this authorization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a myriad of reasons why that is, but its most fundamental aspect is unique to the original investment of developing of the freeway system. So back in the early 80s, as we saw not enough high capacity roadway investments in this region, we needed enabling legislation to establish the unique partnership between the Maricopa Association of Governments and the Arizona Department of Transportation, who of course owns and operates the system. So that was one of the initial reasons why we needed to establish a statutory relationship that's very unique. In other parts of the country, the State Department of Transportation delivers all that high capacity investment, and it's funded at a state level. Unique here, of course, is that funding and investment comes at a local level. And so one of the original reasons enabling legislation was needed back in the 80s was to codify that unique partnership between MAG and our friends down at ADOT, who would implement the vision for which our regional council set.
Thank you. And now I want to move to Mayor Hartke. I would love to hear from you. You've heard from Audra in terms of the plan and reliving all that, and I know you talk about it all the time. I want to hear from you on the mayor's perspective, and also, really how you see this playing out at the legislature.
Thank you, and to those of you who are still kind of blinking at the screen at the myriad of slides, it has been Audra has done an amazing job of breaking down facts, her and others at MAG, and presenting this. And we've looked at many of these slides multiple times with some variation, but I just can imagine it's a horse trough to come up to and understand that. And these slides will be available, I assume, afterwards, that you certainly can look at your own. So it's been a fascinating process. As one of the things that Audra mentioned was, if we would look at all of the projects that were identified by local municipalities and the county, then the number would come up to $90 billion. Well, this by itself doesn't even come close. The projects that we're going to be doing to undertake what will be presented and the extension certainly covers a lot of the freeway extensions, as mentioned, light rail, the other types of things that are mentioned. But in total, even with our federal partnerships, we're talking about $30+ billion that will be covered under this. So to go from 90 billion of projects down to cull this down to say, what can we agree on? And what I mean by that, it's not just mayors who are arm wrestling each other with whether it's East Valley or Central or West Valley, but other considerations in looking at this and trying to see not only what will our voters be interested in improving, but working with the county supervisors as well as all of our legislators, each who have their own opinions on transportation and different aspects of transportation. So to get to the end, I mean, as Audra mentioned, we discussed a penny, we discussed 3/4 cents, we discussed half cent 20 years, and then really forwarded half cent 25. If we really would try to take this out to cover all of the projects mentioned, we'd be up to a nickel. Because again, the federal dollars that are part of this would be fixed. And then the main variant would just be how much more could we ask from our local taxpayers. And there's some other elements that are to be decided. Are there some other large transportation dollars available that certainly MAG and other entities will be applying for that might be part of this particular plan? But one thing, no matter who's around that table, whether it's a trucker on the Transportation Policy Committee that I'm currently honored to chair after Mayor Gallego, and I will be followed with Supervisor Jack Sellers when I'm done with this. But one thing we all agree on is essential that we have a regional plan for transportation. It's not just Phoenix and the environs, it's something that's important to all of us. And this plan certainly does endeavor and does a great job of balancing the needs of individual cities, as I mentioned, as well as East, Central, and West, and the overall valley. It also takes into consideration that we started this project in the 80s, and a number of bridges were built in the 80s. And those bridges are now approaching 40 years old, and there's certainly amount of maintenance that will be required on some of those things that also is essential. We just can't build and ignore what's going to be behind us. And we're working with ADOT and other available entities to see what we can do with that. So we're working with each other. We're working with the public. We're looking at the political climate that we're in. And after this last election, there's been perhaps just a little bit of acrimony between our state legislators and the county. So the whole question of one of the things we wanted to bring front and center initially was just giving us the right to bring this up to a full cent rather than a half cent. And we pretty much all agreed the political climate with the distrust among some members of the state legislatures and our county supervisors could have easily been a poison pill that would not have made that possible. So we certainly focused on what we thought we could work with our legislatures under our existing agreement, which was a half cent, to get across the table. And we're certainly engaged in that right now. This resulted, as you saw with Audra, this transportation values and priorities across our region, and that became the foundation of our plan. I think many of us focused on a little different things. Certainly the West Valley, for example, there was a gathering, a momentum around the continuation and finishing of I-30. As Audra mentioned, one of the projects that was supposed to be in the current Prop 400, but got eked out. That really became a galvanizing voice in the West Valley that everyone wanted. And of course, it's important as connecting even over from north or from Gila Bend, from I-8 to connect to Phoenix, as well as a reliever on I-10, and a lot of exciting economic growth that we're going to see in Buckeye and Goodyear and Avondale, and certainly in Phoenix. And my West Valley mayors and friends, if we could have built that yesterday, or if we can build it tomorrow, certainly it would not be soon enough. But even with that, the process, we've got an emerging force that we talked about today, the development of Rio Imagine, that John McCain had talked about this, the continuation of the Salt River, and making sure that whatever we develop around that was complementary rather than obtrusive if we were building a riverway across the valley, and other irrigation considerations that are part of there that just take years and years, as well as public input. We've had a lot of public input, and we've heard that people are interested more in cycling and alternatives to just vehicles on the road. There's always a question of how much light rail and its expansion should be part of this, and we've agreed on that. The ongoing use of buses. So again, from my perspective, it's been a lot of horse trading in the midst of this. And I really want to thank Flinn-Brown for really helping me better understand our state and how even cities interact with the county and each other, and the state as well. So we've all worked closely together. I've been on this committee, I think, since 2019. And it's really been something that is a moving target, not in terms of people trying to vie, but for example, we had some additional dollars and we're able to move some projects up in the North Valley and Southeast Valley and West Valley, because some other things didn't quite come in. We're able to take a couple $100 million from Prop 400 and use that as part of the much larger piece that's going to be used for the I-10 expansion that will further out the lanes from Chandler all the way to Casa Grande. And between these dollars and the governor committing $400 million not too long ago, that sets the stage for us to be able to go after some more federal dollars. And I think in the process, the gap between 90 billion and 30+ billion is we're going to be looking at and finding all other resources that we can. We're almost there, but even when I say almost, it's even late after this has gone to past the Senate, we're still working out agreements. There were some concerns, for example, on different business partners that wanted to make sure that this met their needs. And so really until this gets passed, I think there will continue to be some good conversations and some priorities that will be further accentuated, and perhaps some flexibility. And flexibility, to me, is one of the main things that MAG was able to build into this. As Audra mentioned, I mean, we're speculating just in my city priorities over the next 25 years. And when we first started this project, that was before Intel announced a $20 billion transportation or $20 billion expansion. Well, that's going to change some of our local priorities in terms of making sure that we've got the mobility in and around there, and the ongoing need for different modes of transportation. So it's been a work in progress that has combined a lot of government entities, a lot of citizen input, a lot of businesses, certainly our state, and we've taken into account safety, primarily air quality, active transportation, and certainly making sure that this is something that's going to move us forward as a valley over the next 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one question that does come up quite a bit at the legislature is why 2022? Why does this need to pass this session? Why does it need to be on the ballot? Talk about the money savings and all of that.
Well, it's a very good question. And the reason is we don't want this to run out. And if for some reason we were not able to get it on the ballot this time, or we run into some other issues, this will give us another chance to get it on at another time. So we were initially hoping to even bring this earlier, and we just saw that that wasn't going to happen, or to bring a version of this earlier to our legislature. So this gives us a little more wiggle room in case we run into some problems that we're running into right now. For example, as mentioned, by Audra, I mean, for this to get on the ballot in November, our legislators are still debating their priorities and bringing this across. There will be a hard date that if they're not able to come together to this, is that we won't be able to get it on the ballot this time. And so the consideration is we want to get it together, but if we can't, then this will give us a little more flexible room to try again.
So Audra, I kind of want to mention, you both mentioned SR 30. How does, if this passes in 2022, does that speed that up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in addition just to the being cognizant that we don't want to have a lapse in funding, as Mayor Hartke had mentioned, by having a successful ballot in November of this year, what we're able to do is bond against that future revenue source that's assured, and it allows us to advance important projects even sooner than the tax coming into play. That's important for a variety of projects, not only our transit projects, but principally for SR 30, as noted. That's a long lead project. It's going to take the commitment of decades to implement it in its entirety. If we were able to get successful enabling legislation, as well as a vote at the ballot this November 2022, we anticipate initiating construction on the first segment of SR 30 in calendar year 2024. If we have to wait, that pushes that project back several years and has a huge economic development impact, for which I'm sure Tim will talk about.
And also for all those that sit on the I-10. So with that, I do want to remind everyone, we will do questions at the end. Please use the Q&A at the bottom anytime. You can type in your questions now. And now I do want to turn it over to Tim. Thank you, Tim. You know, we were just talking about SR 30, and obviously transportation is very important to our economic development. Can you kind of talk about what's happened over the past, 50 years, 40 years, and where we're going to go from here?
I can only speak to the last 38 years, as I just turned 38 last weekend, but I do have some data here to share. And Audra, thank you. I believe you're going to help with the slideshow here. So first off, thank you, Cheryl, for hosting. Thank you, Mayor Hartke, Audra, the MAG team, and obviously the Flynn and the CivEx team who are doing incredible work on this. When we were brought in specifically with to help with MAG, to assist MAG a few months ago, we started looking at our analysis. And before I get into some of the data, I just want to tee up. So for those who are unaware, GPEC is an economic development organization. We do represent 22 cities, including Mayor Hartke's lovely Chandler, as well as Maricopa County, and approximately 190 investors. And, most importantly, our business is business attraction. So I want to clarify, when we, GPEC, have what we call a locate, which we're going to get into here in the next few slides, that is bringing a company that is generally not only outside the region, but outside of the state, to include international. You've probably heard of a little company called Taiwan Semiconductor Company. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But bottom line up front, we came into existence in 1989 due to a regional model, due to some cities and some mayors and economic development directors saying, hey, we have this nice large area. We don't need to be fighting with each other like other markets. So let's all bring this together. So GPEC started 4 years after the first iteration of Prop 400. So what I believe this shows is kind of the proof, right? We've been talking why it's important, the money, the stats, but now we can kind of dig into, what exactly occurred. And again, bottom line up front, but for Prop 400 its iterations, GPEC's work would be dwarfed because we have such a good network of freeways, highways, light rail, multimodal, everything. Next slide, please, Audra. So this is a good snapshot. So again, we came into existence in 1989. So you'll see at the top there, fiscal year 90 through fiscal year 21, which would have put us to June 30 last year. Now, not a big surprise. Every one of those red dots represents an entity or a company that has brought jobs to the area. Some low end, couple of dozen, some high end up to 2,500 per job. And as you see here, it is almost split down the middle. I-17, I-10, 202, all of our major freeways, you can see all of those projects and where they are landing. Next slide, please, Audra. And just for a pure numbers, so again, when we talk about locates, that 890 number, that is 890 companies that have come to the region, to the greater Phoenix area. And to note, that does include a few in Casa Grande because they are part of our MSA. So there are a few down there. And with that, 163,000 jobs. And as I had said previously, we do not want to step on toes. The cities and the economic development director teams, they work on business retention and expansion. So anytime a mom and pop shop is coming up or a slight movement between a smaller business, that is not our responsibility, but it is still important. So again, just to clarify, there's a lot more out there, but this is just the work that GPEC has done. But as you see here, just under 89% within 2 miles of a corridor. Now, that is mostly going to be along those freeways and highways I mentioned, but it is not, it also includes, as we look at the light rail, which obviously in the last 15 years has been a big deal, from Phoenix to Tempe to Mesa, we have seen a lot of our startups and medical-based companies and tech-based companies going in along the light rail as well, because that's what a lot of these entities want to see. They're coming from other areas like California. We all like to talk about our neighbors to the west, and they like that access. And again, without Prop 400 and the previous iterations, we would not have those opportunities. And that's why you see. Next slide, Audra. This is a little more diluted amount. This is just the last 5 years. So obviously a little bit less red, but again, look at that. It's almost like a perfect plot line, right? We're lucky in this region. We have a grid system. Mayor Hartke and I were just in DC last weekend, and I can tell you, I very much appreciate the Phoenix transportation system and the east to west, north south a lot more. What this is a good example of, however, and I think, and maybe it'll come up in Q&A and Mayor Hartke can speak to that. Chandler and some of that East Valley, they really had that kind of tech corridor and, over the last 15 years. And that was kind of like, they were the originators. And we saw a lot of those entities, Intel, all these big companies moving there. And it took a while for some of that to push out west. But as we've seen, anybody who's driven on the 303 in the last couple of years, there's something new every time. Every time I drive there, it's like, oh, hey, there's a company. We helped land them and worked with the cities along that. And so you still have kind of on the east side, a lot of the tech-focused companies, fabs, chips, et cetera. And now on the west, because of the distribution routes, and again, trade with California, trade with other states, you're seeing e-commerce, distribution, large entities that are making things, moving things, and employing people. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, when what we call prospective locates or prospects, when they're coming in, they're blown away by our system, how efficient it is, how open it is, and how many modes of transportation and ways of transportation to move goods is important. And again, we have to continue that investment. I believe Mayor Hartke, or maybe Audra had pointed out, the West Valley's booming now. Buckeye, fastest growing, I believe, in the city. They're expected to be, I think it's 150,000 by 2030 or 40. I'm sure Audra has that and she'll correct me. But we have to continue. I-11 is going to happen eventually. And before you know it, we are going to be a large interconnected region. Audra, next slide, please. And we can't talk about this without talking about, and this is what we've tried to parlay to legislators, fiscal impact. Looking at, again, the numbers in front of you are just the last 5 years, but I'm not going to go line by line. But when you see these direct revenue, especially those within the mile or 2 mile, these are serious numbers and they add up. And that helps the coffers of the cities, the county, and the state. And without that, without Prop 400, without this intentional planning, this intentional investment, we do not have these. I've kind of hinted at the TSMCs of the world, but looking at what are the new industries, electric vehicle manufacturing, chip and fab manufacturing. TSMC is up on the north side of Phoenix now. We have, I say we, GPEC, we have just under 4 dozen supply chain companies that are either set or are going to be set within the region. And it's because TSMC is the largest manufacturer of semiconductors in the world. Everything you use on a daily basis uses semiconductors. Therefore, chemical, substrate, packaging, manufacturing, they're all coming in because TSMC is there. TSMC is there because of the hard work of many of the folks in the city of Phoenix, the county, the state, the ACA, because they saw the opportunity there. And what's interesting on some of these supply chain companies is they're looking everywhere. They're not just looking North Phoenix. They're looking in Gila Bend. They're looking down in Maricopa. They're looking even down in Casa Grande, where they can do some of the more arduous tasks, the chemicals and things like that, because of the freeway system, because of access to the region. When, I hope I'm not sharing out of school here, but when we were discussing this Prop 400 extension with legislators, we had unlikely allies, at least in my mind, of rural legislators who are far away from the metro region, but they saw it and they know that for good freeways, good highways, and again, just efficient transportation, it benefits the region. I was surprised when I personally heard of some of these supply chain companies who are going to be an hour, 2 hours away from TSMC, but they didn't care because it is a huge economic impact. And when those supply chain companies branch out to, I know we're focused on our county and Maricopa County, but that does start to shift out to some of the cities and communities outside of our state, which I think is really important because, again, intentional planning makes successful regions. Here at GPEC, we look at our competitor regions, obviously Texas, California, and even on the East Coast, North Carolina is booming right now. And a lot of these cities and a lot of these entities, they are behind. They're needing to pass these large infrastructure plans just to keep up. And they're generally too far behind. And so it's going to take them years to catch up. Whereas under the leadership of our communities, of MAG, of all of our leadership over the last 40 years, they've gotten this done. Next slide, please, Audra. I think that should be it. And if you could take it off, Audra. I just had one final comment. I think what's most important, the individuals that have been involved pushing this extension, obviously using consultants and different types of PR things, the messaging on this is vastly popular with our residents, with our constituents, and with members of our county. Even the negative messaging polled well. So when you're good, when your positive messaging polls extremely high, and even your negative messaging still polls pretty high, that's a good sign. Obviously, we have to jump through some hoops, and we have to go, sing for our supper down at the Capitol to get this done. But I think we lose track of this is popular with our residents. And yes, there's some political issues that we have to work through, but at the end of the day, this is good for our region. So again, that's really all. I'm definitely happy to take any questions or if we're opening it back up. But again, I just want to say thank you to the team putting this on and obviously to the panelists and to Cheryl. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. And again, please type in your questions in the Q&A. Tim, I do have one question for you. You kind of talked about it, but when you're working with, I'll say companies or new industries to come in here, do they really look for a county or a state that has dedicated funding for transportation?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question we, especially, and I'm going to bring it back to GPEC, competitor markets, right? We want the nation to succeed, but at the end of the day, we want to succeed a little more than our competitors.
Right.
And when you look at, 10 years ago, it was Austin, right? 10 years ago, Austin was getting everybody. Well, Austin just had a pass, and I think it was a 2 billion, maybe 1 billion more. I'll just say 6 billion to keep up. We met with an economic development group that is just outside of San Antonio, between Austin, and they're now getting all the overflow. And so again, Austin's playing catch up. So now some of these, they're not even looking at those major hubs anymore. And especially we kind of break down our prospects and our locates into two. Kind of have your traditional back office, your insurance, your banks, things like that. They can go into a building, they can set up. But then the other half is industrial, it is manufacturing. Again, those are high CapEx projects because they're coming in, they're building stuff, they're employing people, they're shipping stuff, and they need a more complex network as to say just a smaller bank or smaller insurance company. Not that that's not important, putting 50 people in a building. And due to our proximity to California, they are looking at how easy can we get trucks out if they're making things, how easier is it to get to the freeway or the highway and to get out. And so absolutely intentional planning matters. And that's why we've been able to essentially poach, I think, some of these companies from, again, your Californias, your Texas and whatnot. But they want to see it too. And I know internally at GPEC, when we are speaking to clients, we are always heralding Prop 400, and we're always talking about our local leadership, our community leadership, and our county leadership, because they have the foresight, they know what is best, and it has been successful.
So I knew we were going to get a question on water, and we did. So I guess, Mayor Hartke, I'm going to start with you first, because I do think Chandler has been very innovative. The question is water use negotiated by individual cities? Are there requirements to make companies water neutral? So I want to give you, Mayor Hartke, because I do think Chandler has been ahead of the times on a lot of that. And then Tim, maybe you as well can talk about that broadly.
Great. So as I've learned what other cities are doing, I also came into this realization is that every city's water plan and water assurances are a little different. And I know in Chandler, we've invested tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that we have an assured water supply that will not only meet today, that will also allow us to continue to expand, to allow Intel to expand and even take in others. In fact, I asked my city manager earlier this week, and he just responded today about our water table. And since we changed from agrarian to people and even a high-tech city, our water table underneath us is still going up. And I just confirmed that today. And I think that's been a long-range plan in which we and other cities across the state, bought into, that said, we won't take more water out than we've put in. So certainly the news with CAP is a wake-up call, but it does affect every city differently. For example, in Chandler, it doesn't affect tier 1 water shortage, does not affect our water supply at all. Now, in saying that, we will certainly be responsible, as we have been, and offer and continue to offer conservation efforts. Intel has been a leader in water use again and again. They reuse their water for chillers, sometimes I think 15, 20 times, and do a very good job of cleaning it up. They continue to replenish our aquifer underneath us. So again, every city's a little different. In the East Valley, we're blessed with Salt River Project, and certainly that extends a little further. But we're not worried in the short term. And when I say short term, I mean decades still, in terms of being able to supply water for Intel, other manufacturing, as well as address our needs. A tier 2, a tier 3 has an impact upon us and more on other cities, but we are all working together. We are all looking at this. We are making sure we're able to do what we're able to do and not shortchange our residents so that their taps are going to not turn on.
Yeah, and I think I was on a panel yesterday with the water director from Gilbert, and town of Gilbert was talking about their water policy program and in terms of, I'll say prioritizing or focusing on certain industries and really focusing in on, like the question is getting into in making companies water neutral.
And one of the things we did years ago, I think we were maybe the first one, is that we actually passed a code that if a high water user came to Chandler that didn't fit our economic portfolio, we could tell them that they had to find their own water. Let's just say a water bottler that was high intense water use, not great paying jobs. And it really has, it has moved a lot of companies that wanted to be in Chandler elsewhere, just by forward thinking, is that we didn't want to have to dig into our portfolio to cover everybody.
So Tim, broadly for GPAC.
Yeah, and I think Mayor hit, well, first off, we understand this is a major issue. We're all seeing in the news, we see Lake Mead, we know this is a large issue. So I do not want to dilute that thought at all. But as Mayor had pointed out, moving away from the agrarian nature, our water use, and I'll have to check the stats here. I think it's since 1960, it's basically about the same, right? As we have shifted away from some of that, we have obviously expanded quite a bit since that time. But I know through our work, working with cities like the city of Chandler and covering such a large area, we have a great relationship with APS, SRP, EPCOR, all these other entities because of the territories. And you've seen some shifts. Years ago, data centers were big, heavy water use. Now we're kind of moving away from that. I know, at least on our side, and Mayor may have some more info, as I think he brought that up with Intel. A lot of our manufacturing, especially on the chip, semiconductor, and fab side, they are either getting very close to kind of a net neutral by reuse, gray, and other systems, which I am not smart enough to speak to, but I listen to them and it makes sense. They are shifting towards that. I know, especially on the semiconductor side, they have really clamped down on how to be the most efficient possible with their use of water, which again, it's easy coming from the GPEC side, because when we have a project in town, we're sitting with the communities, we're sitting with the company, and we're sitting with the utility providers and water providers. And as Mayor Hartke had said, that it is now, probably 20 years ago, it's like, we'll give you whatever you want. Yeah, come on in. And now there is a very disciplined mentality to who we're bringing in, what is the cost offset, what is the return? And I don't just mean financially, I mean regionally, environmentally, things like that. And that is it's a very serious topic. And that has been, I would say, one of the most discussed points during projects here at my time at GPEC.
Yes, definitely. Going back to Prop 400E, and I'm not sure who wants to answer it, maybe Audra and the mayor. We just had this large federal infrastructure package passed by Congress. How does Prop 400E tie in with that to leverage those dollars?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the points that we've really attempted to express to the legislature is that a commitment at a local level is critical to being able to successfully chase those new federal discretionary dollars that are historical, coming through the IIJA bipartisan infrastructure bill at the end of last year. And no region is better positioned than this one in the country, with a brand new plan and investment strategy to be successful at chasing those dollars. And in doing so, that brings new dollars to this region that would have gone to other parts of the country, and further leverages the commitment that our local constituents are making, and helps to advance statewide priorities. We focused a lot on Maricopa County and this plan here in the region, but I don't want to underestimate the value of these investments to statewide priorities in complementing specifically ADOT's priorities through the Intermountain West. If we are able to get enabling legislation and a vote successful this November, we're able to chase at a much more competitive rate than anyone else in the country with a brand new plan, as well as a future revenue source, to be able to bring those new dollars to this region.
Well, I do want to point out that the link to the presentations has been provided, and I believe we're going to also send it out, but definitely the link is there. I want to thank everyone. This has been a really great discussion on the importance of Prop 400E, what it is, and why we need to move forward with it in 2022. So I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and you all have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Happy birth week, Tim.
Thank you, sir.